All right, hello. Thank you all for being here this evening. My name is Bee Burak. I'm a senior here at Dartmouth. I'm from Hopkinton, New Hampshire, and I study history and politics. I also have experience working on political campaigns and reporting on politics for statewide and local publications here in New Hampshire. So I'm very excited to be here with you and with two very knowledgeable New Hampshire politicos to talk about youth civic engagement ahead of this really important election we have coming up. So on behalf of the Rockefeller Center and Dartmouth Civics, which are the co-sponsors of tonight's event, I want to welcome New Hampshire Democratic Party Chair Raymond Buckley and New Hampshire Republican Party Chair Chris Ager to Dartmouth. Tonight, my co-moderator Armida Mirkarimi and I will be asking, well, I'll call you guys up in just one moment. We'll be asking Chair Buckley and Chair Ager a few questions, and then we'll open it up to some audience Q&A, so start thinking about questions. But before we begin, Armida and I just wanted to give a little bit background on our involvement with this issue of youth civic engagement.
Yes, hello everyone. My name is Armida. I am also a senior. I'm studying government, creative nonfiction, and Middle Eastern studies. I'm also a journalist at WMUR, where I'm seeing the intricacies of New Hampshire politics close up. So I'm very excited to be here today. So during the 2022 election season, BNI co-founded Dartmouth Civics. We are a nonpartisan club on campus that empowers students to vote and engage with their communities. In just 2 years, we have facilitated over 1,000 conversations with students about voting. We also helped register hundreds of students to vote, host annual forums for students and community members so that we can all hear from each other before town elections. So we're here to talk about youth civic engagement and so excited to have our panelists here with us today. And yeah, with that being said, please join us on stage. So to just get us started, we'd love to know, how did you first get involved with politics, Chairman Buckley?
Well, my story is much longer, so maybe we'll start with, he can tell, then I'll, when I start seeing some of you fall asleep, I'll wrap my story up.
I'm happy to go first. So I was born in Providence Hospital in Southeast Washington, D.C., and grew up inside the Beltway as a kid. And I was always interested in politics because every day it was national politics. The front page of the paper, local news, was national political news. And so I kind of grew up with that. When President Nixon was in office, I went to the Easter egg, roll as a preteen, rolling eggs in there. So it was just natural, politics was just part of life. And but I really got involved in politics when I got out of the Army, did 7 years in the Army, and moved into Merrimack, New Hampshire, and there was the Rotary Club was building a playground. And it was all donations, and it was just a local community getting together, no tax money. And we were living in a hotel before we even had a house, and I joined the Rotary group to do that, and that was like civic engagement. It's like old classical de Tocqueville type of America, where people in the community just get together and do something because it needs to be done. And somebody said, Chris, why don't you run for budget committee? Because you're pretty good with the numbers and the money. I ran for budget committee, and then I ran for school board, and then I took about 10 years off, and then I came back and became the Republican chairman of our town, and then the county infrastructure, and kind of just worked my way up to become the party chairman. So I've done all the jobs in between, budget committee, all the local jobs in between. And it was a natural progression. It wasn't one day I said, I want to be party chairman as a kid. You might hear, my counterpart has a different story. But, I had 3 kids, Army, life, work, everything. And in the middle of that, at some point, after I'd finished the school board and took 10 years off, I was like, it's time to time to get back into the mix. And so here I am.
So my parents were born and raised in the southwest corner of the state, in the area of Keene. Both of them were born into horrifically dysfunctional family situations. If you imagine anything bad that can happen to a child that happened to one of them, they happened to find each other when they were in their mid-teens. And when my mother was 16, she had me. And they had no skills and no real prospects and obviously no family support. So when I was 3 in 1963, my father got a call from somebody that knew him. Hey, there's a project out in Detroit, Michigan. My dad became a welder. And so we moved to Michigan for 3 years. And obviously being extremely low income, we moved into the part of Detroit that was very integrated. We had a lot of students that were immigrant students, people of color. And so imagine 3-year-olds, so nursery school, kindergarten, first grade, I never was told or experienced that somebody's skin color was any different than if you had straight hair or curly hair. It just wasn't in my world. And so then we came back. We were living in a bad situation, living in the basement of these elderly people in Keene. And in second grade, February 1967, and my teacher started talking about Abraham Lincoln and the Civil War. And I was like, whoa, you're telling me that the great-great-grandparents of my friends that I left in Detroit were owned? And I was so horrified as a 7-year-old that I said, you have to do something or bad people will be in control. And so I started volunteering the very next year at 8 years old, convinced my parents to register to vote, and got very involved. In elementary school, I was a volunteer for Ed Muskie's presidential campaign, but I really, most people look at me as from the Carter campaign when I was 15 and 16 years old. So there you go. It was my horror over the issue of slavery, and that then expanded into all sorts of equality issues. But it was really that passion that lit the spark.
So somewhere along the way of that process, you got in your head that you wanted to be party chair, right? I'll let you talk about that in a moment maybe, but I'm curious, and I think that some folks in the audience might be curious, what a party chair does. What's your day-to-day job? Maybe starting with Chairman Buckley and then going to Chairman Ager.
The job constantly is changing. I've been on my state committee since I was 18, so almost 40 years ago. And the role of state chair was a volunteer position that rarely came in the state party office. We would have 1 or 2 staff people at the work. So the party really, it was more somebody that would send out press releases or something when asked. And now I'm a full-time paid chair, and I have 13 permanent staff members. Right now on payroll, we have 220 folks because of the get out the vote operation for the election. It is much more to do with fundraising and to do with participating in various big picture planning versus little stuff. Though I spent Saturday at putting together packets for canvassers. And going out, knocking on doors and doing that sort of stuff, but just trying to keep the peace, as you'll hear throughout the night. Not all activists like to get along with other activists, so trying to make sure that everyone's heading in the right direction, lifting up, encouraging people to work a little harder if they haven't been, or help out somebody else if they're in a district that they can be helpful with. So it's really, you see the thing on the news where, not news, on TV, where you've got the thing where the guys got plates on the end of a pole and they're spinning the plates. So you really were running around spinning, keeping the damn plates from falling and crashing on the floor.
So I'd say, yeah, the big overall job, you know, you could describe as like the head cheerleader for the party in the state, but it's, you know, day to day, it's you know, equipping and training and recruiting for your candidates, because your job is to get people of your party elected. I mean, at the end of the day, you know, your scorecard is, did your people get elected or not? And so how can you help? So recruiting, training, and then resources. And resources isn't just handing money to candidates. I mean, as our candidates know, that doesn't happen. You know, we don't just hand money to candidates, but there's infrastructure with voter checklists and databases of volunteers and previous ads that have worked. There may be polling that we do at a macro level that we then share. So it's kind of that core infrastructure as best as you can to try to help, at the end of the day, win elections. So November 5th is like our Super Bowl, and any other sports analogy you want to come up with. It's all wrapped into one day. You know, and there's over, I think, 500 people running with the R or D against their name, and you're trying to help all of them win. One other part of being in the party, you know, raising money, again, as Chairman Buck pointed out, huge part of it, because you need the money. It's a means to an end. The end is getting people elected, but that infrastructure, very important. The other thing is you're almost like a mental health counselor to activists who are upset that how come so-and-so didn't do this, and you're like, okay, you know, I can't control these people, but you have to be able to listen to people's concerns. And sometimes you can take those concerns and turn it into action. And even if somebody calls you and the first impression is, oh, not this complaint again, you know, then you go, wait a minute, there may be something to that. And it's worth, you know, once you get through the initial, you know, angst, you know, there's something in there. And so listening to those people and making sure you understand what's happening out there to make the best decisions, very important. So listening to feedback is a skill I think that a party chairman has to have. You just got to be able to listen to people and not just do your own gut instinct. You've got to listen to data, listen to people, assess it all. And then when you make a decision, sometimes you got to stick with it even when you're taking a lot of heat. And Chairman Buckley's been in the job about 18 years. I'm about 20 months. And I'm not so sure I would look as good as him if I was doing this for that long.
I think one of the things that I focus on too is representation. Growing up in New Hampshire, rural New Hampshire, you know, in the 70s, I really honestly thought I was the only gay person in New Hampshire. In fact, there's a funny story I tell people about. I was about 15 and we had the news on and they said, gay bar in Boston raided. And I quickly grabbed a crayon out of one of my sister's hands and wrote the name of the gay bar down. Kept it in my pocket. I said, well, if it ever gets too bad, I could just walk all the way to Boston if I have to be away from all of you. So I think it's important that representation, so that people see people involved in politics, whether it's economic representation or age or ethnicity or gender, you know, just trying to make sure that everyone feels welcome and included, because it's easy to just kind of go along and not think that through, and then you lose really good people that don't feel like they got included. And you know, one of the things that I'm sure Chris would agree on is the least favorite is, how come I got a worse table at the dinner than, you know, Susie did? And we have our big dinner this Thursday, and I've already started getting the calls. Where am I sitting? Where's my table? I was like, are you really serious?
Yeah, one other thing, like strategic outreach, just another word to put on what Ray was talking about, but you know, the Republican Party has been reaching out to unions because, you know, who the parties appeal to changes over time, and this happens, you know, frequently, but we're in kind of a potential shift of union membership, and union leadership's not quite there yet. So, we have to help them along by reaching out. Same thing with young people. Young people, just demographically are more Democrat than Republican. That's factual. But it's not something that I say, well, that's the way it is. It's like, what are we as a party not doing to reach out? What are the policies that we can control that would be more attractive? And we can't do that unless we're listening to young people. And so, we've got to be able to do that. It's not something that the Republican Party has had as a major focus, but I can see that's changing. It started with the unions, and President Trump made that front and center at the convention when he had the Teamsters speak in a really long time slot. But we have to appeal, and we have to make the case, and we have to offer the solutions. And we are a big tent, and we're getting bigger, and some people in the tent like it to be a little tent because then their needs are taken care of. If you got a small tent, you have a few really happy people, but they're a minority of the bigger. And so we're expanding it. When you expand the tent, sometimes you have growing pains where people say, wait a minute, why are you talking about climate? And it's like, well, because there are a lot of people out there who care about it. And there are issues that we may be able to address that can still be within our core overall values. And so we have to talk about the issues that people are concerned about. And right now, yes, we're in a minority in young people. But we're reaching out to see if we can't change that. And I'm sure it's even better when you're a battleground demographic, because then both sides listen to you even more. And so that's what we're trying to create.
Interesting. Chairman Ager, you mentioned that November 5th is the Super Bowl, but we know that civic and voter engagement extends beyond just the federal election. So starting with Chairman Buckley, how do you think young people and just people in general can stay involved in their communities beyond the federal election?
Well, the beauty of New Hampshire is you only have to be 18 years of age to run for any municipal office, whether it's mayor of Manchester or selectman in Sugar Hill, or library trustee or town budget committee. All of those are open to anyone running. In fact, 18 is the age for state legislator and for most county offices as well. And so we are trying to encourage young people to run. But there's all sorts of activities that are constantly occurring, issues obviously during the legislative session, keeping them informed on their hearings on various issues that impacted them or is concerned with them. So including them, being part of that, making sure that we don't have a function that doesn't include them on the agenda, that people don't feel into. And we try to come up with new and creative things, but there is a level, the level of engagement of this generation versus my generation is night and day. I couldn't get anyone in my high school to even talk to me about politics. I made them listen to me anyways, but there was just zero interest. And I see so many young people that are so fully engaged and really understanding that this is their future, and they need to grab control of it. Sort of like when it triggered me as that 7-year-old. It's like, don't expect somebody else to do it. You got to roll up your sleeves and do it yourselves. And I think a lot of this generation really understands the importance of being involved and engaged and accepting the responsibility, really, of speaking out in creating the sort of America, the sort of world, the sort of New Hampshire that they want. And both parties are very welcoming of young people to be part of their leadership and part of the activity. We are not the norm for state parties around the country. There's a lot of places where young people are just locked out, but both the New Hampshire Republican Party and the New Hampshire Democratic Party have a long history of engaging and involving young people.
Yeah, I would just like to add, my suggestion would be, take something that you care about, that you're passionate about, something that you're like emotionally attached to, you really care about an issue, and then make sure you do your homework, get smart on it, and so that you don't go with just your emotion and somebody chops you off at the knees on the facts. You want to go in and have your facts and pick something you're interested in, whatever it is, and go to that as your avenue to get involved. Because if you care about something and you're passionate about it, you'll do a better job, you'll spend more time, and it'll be more enjoyable to be part of. And so whatever that is, it can be anything from running for office. Say if you care about libraries, you could run for library trustee. But if you care about libraries, but you don't want to be a trustee, there may be a bill in Concord you can testify on. And you can find out when that is. But find out whatever that niche is that you enjoy and dig deep into it so that you become somewhat of an expert, and go out and do that and let that be your avenue to be involved. And I think it'll be enjoyable. You'll find other avenues of places and things you can do as well. It's not all about run for state rep right out of the gate. Some people can do that. And we had an 18-year-old get elected, and we have 2 college students today running as Republicans for state representative, and the Democrats do as well. And so, that could be an avenue, but it could be something much, much more modest. But if you're interested in it, it is so much more fun, and you can dig deep and then become an expert. So when you talk to people, they'll be like, this person knows what they're talking about. They should be listened to. And then your influence grows on that issue you care about. So pick that one thing and dig deep would be my suggestion.
So Chairman Ager, you, as you just mentioned earlier, recently stepped into this role of party chair. So I'm wondering what has surprised you most, and also what do you see for the future of the Republican Party in New Hampshire? What does that look like?
Yeah. So what surprised me most is I won a competitive race, and this is all public, so it's nothing too exciting. But the Governor Sununu endorsed my opponent, and I ran. But I appealed to the people who voted. I didn't get endorsements from out of state, from big political figures, anything. I just talked to the people that voted and said, what do you care about? What can you do? What do you think I need to do? And I talked to them individually as much as possible. And that personal connection, I think, matters a lot more than anything else. I think that's the thing I discovered is the people that I know and trust and had some working relationship with, you immediately naturally gravitate to them for advice, for help, and growing that circle is really important. But right at the very beginning, it was the people I knew and trusted that I could talk to. It wasn't, the big, consulting firms paying people to help me. It was my friends. And so I think you have to start there. But you've got to grow very quickly. In this job, my friends are still my friends, but they're now a tiny, tiny part of my go-to because I had to expand it very quickly because I needed to. It's a big party, a lot of people, a lot of different perspectives, and a lot of good people that weren't my friends. And so I think, to kind of summarize that ramble is you got to start with people you know and trust, but you can't stop there. You've got to make your personal tent big, and that's what we're trying to do with the party also. We had our core constituencies. Where I see the party going is the New Hampshire party is going to moderate and grow to the center, which is different than what the national party's doing. So I see us being a little bit of an outlier to the national party Republicans. And the reason is we represent the people of New Hampshire. And the national party represents a little bit more of the Arkansas, Tennessee, Missouri, the center of the country values more than New Hampshire. And we have to represent New Hampshire with a Republican, kind of values superimposed, but we're different. New Hampshire Republicans are different than Republicans in the Bible Belt, in the South, the Midwest, West Coast. I think there's a few in California. Those 2 or 3 in California, we're different than them too. But I see the party growing to the center, and that's going to be the battleground. And we're going to have it's going to be good for the state because we're going to be appealing to what the majority of the people in the state want done. And then if we can have the battle of ideas on how best to do that between the Republicans and Democrats, it only makes the state a better place to live.
So Chairman Buckley, you've been in this role for quite a bit longer. You are, as I understand, the longest serving Democratic Party chair in any state in the country, and maybe chair of any party? Not
Probably.
so.
Probably. We'll get the facts on that later. So I'm curious what you see for the future of the New Hampshire Republican Party, and specifically, do you see New Hampshire moving more towards alignment with sort of the national party, or are we also an outlier here in New Hampshire on the Democratic side?
Well, it has been dramatic. When I was a young person, New Hampshire was a solid Republican state. The likelihood that we were going to win a major office. In fact, from 1980 to 1996, so for 16 years, so from the time I was 20 to 36, we didn't win a single major race in New Hampshire. So it was slim pickings here. And then starting with, we won a congressional seat in 1990, held it in 92, carried the state for Clinton. But then really it was Gene Shaheen's election as governor in 1996 that really kind of rebranded the Democratic Party in New Hampshire. And most of those who have been successful, 90%, have followed her lead. So we're seeing a transformation. Prior to, the likelihood that a Democrat was going to carry the state for the presidential cycle was not very, in fact, we carried it since, I think we carried it in 1912, 1932, 1936, 1964, and then the very next time was 1992. So we didn't really pay much attention to even the Electoral College because it didn't matter. They weren't going to get. But since then, since 92, only 2000 was the time it's gone Republican. It's gone Democratic every single time. And we're experiencing this very unnerving situation where the Trump campaign hasn't targeted New Hampshire. So it's the first time in history since Abraham Lincoln that the Republican presidential nominee wasn't pulling full forces in here. So it's kind of left all of us a little off because you know what to expect, how this is all going to interact. And so we're in a different world when it comes to that. And so there's different offices. We've got the hottest, as they say, hottest gubernatorial election in the country going right now after the implosion of the Republican candidate in North Carolina. So if you turn on television or even probably any of your devices, you're going to see some level of commercials like one side or the other in the governor's race. Congressional races don't seem to be as top shelf as they were last cycle. Both first and second congressional districts spent tens of millions of dollars, and this is a much quieter time. So we'll see how it all fits together, how it works, who turns out. But you can see the slow transformation of New Hampshire. It's going to be joining the rest of New England relatively soon. If we had been successful in 2016, we'd be in a different situation because we would have been able to make sure that there were ungerrymandered districts for the Executive Council and the House and the Senate. And we would, because more voters in New Hampshire go and vote for Democrats running for the state Senate, for the state House, for the Executive Council, but because they packed us into these districts, that even though more people vote for us, they still hold the majority. If we had fair, nonpartisan districts, we feel pretty confident we would have a consistent majority in the legislature too. So lots riding in the next 10 years.
Let's shift to talking about House Bill 1569. So Governor Chris Sununu signed this bill in September, and the bill removes the ability for people to vote with an affidavit if they don't have all the proper documentation, identification documentation with them at the polls. This will impact how first-time voters vote in the next election because it won't apply in the November 5th election. So Chairman Ager, I'd love to hear what you have to say. What is your position on this bill, and how can we ensure that young voters are turning out in both local and federal elections?
Yeah, so I think it's super easy to vote in New Hampshire. And you just need to register. You can register in advance at your town hall with the clerk, or you can same day register. You just need to take the documentation you need with you. Everything's online. Pretty sure everybody here has a device they can go online, okay? And go online, make sure you take the proof of who you are. And, that can be a driver's license, but something that proves who you are, where you're domiciled, and the law is very clear. If you're a student and you want to domicile at your dorm and say you're from here, you can do that. You can also do an absentee ballot to your home state if that's where you prefer to vote, and that's where the issues that affect you the most, could be. So you can do absentee ballot. You still have got plenty of time to request an absentee ballot if you'd registered at your previous home, and you prove your citizenship. So if you have a birth certificate, passport, anything that proves your citizenship, then you can vote. We do not want to repeat the 2020 allegations of people concerned about, who are these people who voted. We want to make sure everybody is confident in when people vote, everything's good. And New Hampshire is very good. And so the law that Governor Sununu signed does not take effect this November 5th. So there is no change. There is still an affidavit opportunity. If you're registered to vote, you forget to bring ID, sign the affidavit, take your picture, agree to come back, show them your stuff later. I mean, it's still in effect right now. The reason the governor delayed signing it, actually he didn't delay, the Senate delayed sending it to the governor to sign, is so that it would not go into effect this year and change the way the election is run so close to an election. That's why the governor delayed it. Also, it allows for what we knew were the imminent lawsuits that have already been drawn. Give time for all that to settle down, so the next time this would be available for a statewide election and a federal election would be 2026. So there's plenty of time to work through the bugs between now and then, go through the court case. But this issue has polled extremely well amongst the American people. Democrats, Republicans, men, women, young, old, people say, hey, I need an ID to do anything, it's important. Anything, airline, get your prescription drugs, all kinds of things that you need your ID for. Voting is as important, if not more important, than all of those other things. Why wouldn't you have the same requirement for an ID for that as you do to go get a prescription or get on an airplane, which is less important. And we need the elections to be confident. I'm very confident in New Hampshire elections right now. I'll be even more confident when that law goes into effect in 2 years.
Chairman Buckley.
First, the law is never going to actually go into effect because we're going to win the governor's race in the majority, and we'll repeal it lickety-split, as they say. And if for some reason we don't have one of those three entities, we indeed will be in court. And we're very successful at taking the New Hampshire Republican passed anti-voter legislation to court and winning. Listen, New Hampshire voters voted for hundreds of years without having to show an ID, without having to do all these. When did this all come about? Well, I'll tell you. Back to what I just said, in 1996 when Jeanne Shaheen was elected governor, the Republicans lost their minds. They were like, what the hell? A Democrat won in New Hampshire? That's impossible. Had to have cheated. I was in the legislature at the time. I was on the House Election Law Committee, and we had Republican legislators coming in and telling us, you had busloads of people from Massachusetts coming and voting in my town. I'm like, okay, what was the color of the bus? What was the name on the side of the bus? Did you write down the license plate number? Now, if there were busloads of people, that means that if they all voted same-day registration, so there must be a list of like 30 or 40 people that all within the same hour registered. Do you have that list? Of course, none of it. It's all a bunch of bull. And that has spawned an enormous amount of legislation. In each election cycle, they come up with a new thing. The reality is over 1 million ballots. If you look at the presidential primary, look at the state primary, the general election, and then the municipal elections as well. How many instances of actual voter fraud? It is out of 1 million or so ballots each year, we find maybe 1, maybe 2. Believe it or not, more often than not, they're Republican, but that's okay, we won't bring that up. And it is designed to try to discourage. The idea alone, now granted, we don't have a massive population of people of color, but it does impact people of color in a larger percentage.
Why would you say that?
Because
the
it's true.
people of color know how to get an ID just as much as you.
It's not, well,
I mean, that's an insult. I'm sorry.
No, well, it's not. It's the truth. It is a barrier to try to discourage people of color to vote because they vote Democratic, trying to discourage youth from voting. And you know, they've come after student voting, you know, every 2 years. And all of that, none of that was ever discussed prior to '96. You just never heard anything that, you know, nothing, oh, we just had the election, then suddenly Democrats, so something must be wrong. Because God forbid it's the fact that we nominate people that the voters don't want to vote for. It has to be some reason the Democrats are doing something improper, which of course, you know, my party couldn't keep a secret to save its life. So if somebody did one thing, everyone would know within minutes. It's just not happening. But what it does is trying to discourage, whether it's elderly, people of color, young people, disability community, from actually registering and voting because they vote for Democrats in a higher percentage. Hopefully, once we return some normalcy to the state, some of this nonsense will end and people can trust that they are going to be able to vote. The thing is, the Republicans passed same-day voter registration in 1993 in reaction to Bill Clinton's passing of the motor voter law, where you go into any government entity, you can register to vote. And Republicans in New Hampshire are like, oh no, we can't do that. So let's come up with same-day voter registration. Well, Judd Gregg was able to put that in. He was in the U.S. Senate, former governor. And so they passed that. So we're exempt from the motor voter legislation. But then every 2 years, there's always some Republican that's like tries to repeal that, and then they get told, "Oh, you want motor voter? Okay, we'll take motor voter," and then suddenly they disappear and don't talk about it anymore. So making sure that everyone, I would rather lose an election where 100% of the people who are eligible to vote voted, than win an election where only a very small percentage of voters actually made the determination. The issues that our elected officials determine have such an impact on people's lives, and I know people get busy in life, so they don't always understand the magnitude of the question. When I first got elected to the legislature, I was just shocked at the variety of issues that suddenly you're confronted with as an elected official. That just wasn't something that you ever thought about, but government has a role in nearly every aspect of your life.
I want to give Chairman Ager a chance to respond here, just specifically if we could talk about the youth voter effort.
Sure.
So at Dartmouth and in the New Hampshire State House, as we've been hearing, youth voting and civic engagement are often characterized as a partisan effort. And so I'm wondering, do you agree or do you disagree with that? Excuse me, sorry if that's me, that characterization, and then what, if any, role should schools, parents, teachers play in helping young people engage and vote and get involved in those civic processes, or do you think that should be something that people are sort of figuring out separately?
No, thank you. I think it's our duty to make sure that young people, as they approach voting age, understand the responsibility, what it is, how you can impact, and that should be done in a nonpartisan way. So I think the concern would be, if there's a voter drive that one party hijacks, then there's a concern there. But we've got to do the outreach, we've got to do the education, we've got to explain what what it is you're doing, how you do it, and make it easy for people to get into the voting process. Historically, about 79% of New Hampshire registered voters vote, and those numbers are kind of squishy because of same-day registration and the voter rolls with outdated some people on it who haven't been taken off, but roughly 79%. Third highest in the country. We've been third highest, many years, in that top 3. So we have a very engaged population that votes. Youth vote, and I think it was 24 and below. It bounced around, but it's roughly in the 50% range. So the older people get, the more they vote as a percentage. And so there is a gap in that, just call it representation. The reasons for that vary. There's a couple, I think a Circle survey that said young people, they're like, I don't know enough to make it matter if I vote one side or the other, or I'm not as engaged. Let the other people do it who are engaged. Some of the reasons why it's 50% instead of closer to the 79. So anything we can do to help educate, make sure you know how to vote, where to vote. It's not hard, it's pretty easy, it doesn't take a lot of time. And I would love for more young people to vote, because I think the more young people that voted, the better it would be for the Republican Party, and the better it would be for us competing for your votes. And if one party has a domination in a demographic, there's a tendency that they could take it for granted. But if you're being fought over by both parties, you can guarantee people are going to be listening to you and seek out what you care about and try to resolve that. So I think a good competitive two-party system with the youth vote would be good for young people, because their needs would then get more attention from both sides, and we'd be competing on it. And so I also just want to say one thing about the voting. We want everybody to vote. We want to make it easy to vote, but we need people to be confident that there's no loopholes that anybody's trying to exploit. And the motor voter law is a legitimate option. Same-day registration, legitimate option. We picked one that Senator Gregg, years ago, before most of you were born, put in place. We've had this system in place a long time. It works very, very well. And so minuscule number of people used the affidavits in the last election, minuscule number. So we're not turning people away. I don't know of a single young person that was turned away or had to do an affidavit, because we kind of track the numbers. There's very few. So it's not stopping people from voting. It's just factually not stopping anyone from voting.
Chairman Buckley, is that your understanding? And do you think that youth voter engagement is a partisan process? Do you think it's the sort of thing that should be addressed in schools by parents, teachers, et cetera?
Oh, absolutely. I think especially those who go through the New Hampshire public schools, should be much more informed on the power of the vote and the power of democracy. If you look through all of human history, and you cannot find 1.2 million people that had more direct opportunities to have an impact in the way the government is run. We elect over 4,000 municipal positions in all the towns and the cities. In the towns, many of them are yearly. We have the presidential primary. We have the 400-member House. We have same-day voter registration. Many of the towns still have town meetings where any voter can go and participate in the deliberations of creating the budget. So the engagement and involvement, this is ground zero for democracy. And a lot of young people aren't really taught that, and to take advantage of that and take the opportunity to really participate. And I think that that needs to be required, I think, in public high schools in New Hampshire. That there really is. I don't expect every teenager to become a fanatic like me, but I would hope they at least would consider their voice important enough that they would vote.
We would love to go to some audience Q&A now, especially if students have questions. We'd love to answer those first. So we've got Maggie in the back who has a microphone. If you have a question, just raise your hand and she'll come over to you. And if you don't have questions, we have plenty more.
Yeah.
Right here.
Oh, awesome, right up in the front.
I have a question for, oh my God, sorry. I have a question for Chairman Ager about Republican Party in labor. I think you mentioned how the Republican Party is trying to take steps to appeal more towards union members, and I'm kind of wondering, I know in rhetoric what they're doing, but I'm wondering what policies they're approving or supporting that are pro-labor.
Okay, thank you. So the first thing is, well, just my background, I grew up in a union family. One of my earliest fond memories is right around Thanksgiving, taking turkey baskets to union members who were on strike, and in the back of a 64 pickup truck. And these people were not, they were dirt poor, and I literally mean dirt poor. They had an outhouse. This is in the late 1960s when I was a kid.
You went by my grandmother's house?
It could have been. It could have been. But it was in southern Maryland, outside of the Beltway. But I've always had a positive view of the good that unions can do for their members. So that's me personally. But I don't change the policy of the Republican Party myself. So I have a committee in place to look at issues and methodically that are important to labor by talking to them. And we know from their surveys what the issues that are on the surveys, but talking to the union leadership and members about what's important to you. Number one issue is their pay and pension in particular, because that's what the government, the legislators can have an impact on, is their pensions. So we've asked our legislative folks to try to work and say, how can we fix the problem without bankrupting the state? Because as Republicans, we're not going to bankrupt the state. And so how do you do that? It's a hard problem. It's a very hard problem. But if people feel like they've been wronged, they were promised a pension, then all of a sudden at 9 years and 11 months, you no longer get anything, it's an issue of fairness. And so I think that's the number one overarching issue with an element of the unions, is making sure they get a fair day's pay for a fair day's work, a safe environment, and that their pensions are not messed with. And so there's also a difference in the types of unions. You have the building trades, carpenters, painters, all the building folks, and you have teachers' unions. They are two totally different unions. Different, what they care about is different. And so unions are not just one thing. This is a union thing. It's the different unions have different issues. The state employees union, different than AFL-CIO. The issues are different. Teamsters, different than IBEW. And so putting that whole collage together and say, we care about all of you. And right now, I got to say the teachers union is the most challenging, because we don't line up with a lot of the things. They line up, it looks like the Democratic Party platform, frankly. So it's kind of tough. But fairness is really, I think, all anybody wants. They want to be treated fairly. And so that's kind of our overarching view. But the mission is talk to them and find out what they need and what is within the realm of the political environment to do. And there are several issues that the Democrats have had an advantage on meeting the needs of the unions. And we're competing with that now. Some of the unions, building trades especially, 50% of the union members vote Republican. In some of the polls, some specific unions, it's up to 16-70% of some unions. So it's not one monolithic issue. It could be certain segments, but we no longer want to be the party that opposes unions. We want to reach out and expand that tent and bring them underneath as much as possible.
The party staff in New Hampshire, the New Hampshire Democratic Party staff is unionized. They're a member of IBEW. All of campaign workers in our coordinating campaign and effort are also all members of organized labor. And I absolutely believe that Chair Ager is sincere, but it's going to be a massive turnaround of the ship. Every year for decades, there's been an effort to make New Hampshire a right-to-work state, meaning you don't have to, if your union can represent you, you don't have to pay into the union, and it's considered a union-breaking piece of legislation. And every year, every Democrat votes to kill it, and a handful of Republicans, and hopefully, so far, it's always been just enough to kill the legislation. But what happens is then September of the election year comes around, and the far right in the Republican Party gang up on those who voted to defeat the right to work and knock them out. And the last 2 elections alone, I think there's been 12 state legislators that were defeated in their primary, not because of abortion, not because of taxes, just simply because of the right to work piece of legislation. There's a whole organization that's against them. So it's going to be a very difficult task for Chris. And I believe he's, absolutely wants it to happen, but it is a cultural thing within the Republican Party that it's going to be hard for him to take it to that next level.
Yeah, and it's the same theme for different groups as well. It's like, if you haven't been a traditional Republican group for a reason, so there's one reason, say union, it's the right to work, and you agree with us on 90% of everything else, we want you to feel welcome, and we'll try to mitigate that one reason, but there are a lot of other reasons people vote besides the constituent group that they're part of. And a lot of people agree with us on most of the issues besides that one, a single item. So we're trying to mitigate that item. And at the end of the day, how do we make it a better place to live in New Hampshire? How do we make people's lives better? How do we help them with the problems that they have? Every decision should be geared towards that at the end of the day. And we may disagree on how to get there, but if you know where you want to be is, I want to make people's average everyday life better. Well, you can disagree how to get there, but at least you start with like some moral authority to say, I'm going to go there. Everything I do, I'm going to try to get there, and it motivates you to get there. And so with unions, with other groups, young people, people who vote 70% Democrat, 80% Democrat, you're not going to be pushed away. We have a place in our tent for you. If you agree with us on most things, you are absolutely welcome.
Thank you for those responses. Are there any other audience questions before we wrap up this evening?
Don't be shy.
Don't be shy.
Oh, the young lady.
Couple over here, yeah.
You've spoken a bit about polarization in parties and across the nation. I was wondering if, what steps do you guys see as key ones to take going forward to mitigate that polarization and bring voters and legislators more towards agreement?
Let me start, because I think I've got a short one. But the first thing is we have to lead by example as party chairs. And first, Ray and I have a professional, cordial relationship. We had a problem. I won't get into any details, but there was a problem, and we had a phone call, and we fixed it. It didn't become a national New York Times front page stupid issue about New Hampshire. We've done that, and I appreciate the chairman, his willingness to work together on things like that. Instead of making it just a partisan, ugly issue, let's just fix it here locally for the good of New Hampshire. And so we've got to lead by example and do our best. Now, we're going to throw elbows between now and November 5th. This is a cage match. We're going to throw up. We're going to do headlocks, but no low blows, no coming after people's families, no ridiculous, stupid personal things, attacking people. Let's stick to the issues, stick to the candidates, and if we start with example, and also we have to critique our own people. When they do something wrong, we have to critique our people. We can't cover for them when they do something wrong. We have to tell them to knock it off, and we have to do it publicly. And I think over time, that'll help. But so far, I've been happy with the relationship that we've had, even though we don't agree on a lot of policy issues, that we don't want bad actors out there in our parties doing bad things.
Yeah.
Well, we are almost out of time, so I want to ask one final question. Why should young people vote in this election? Chairman Buckley, and then Chairman Ager.
You will hear for the rest of your lives somebody standing up and going, this is the most important election in your lifetime. If you're the understanding of what the U.S. Supreme Court has done, not just with Roe, but with money in politics, affirmative action, they're coming after marriage equality next, and knowing that this next president has the possibility of putting 2 replacements on the Supreme Court, if you care about any of those sorts of issues and want to go back to having progress and making America more just and more equal for all, which is supposedly supposed to be our pledge. We're supposed to be for liberty and justice for all, but it's more of something that we try to attain versus what we've accomplished. Then this election is critically important to vote in the presidential race, to vote because of choice being sent back to states. It's critically important in the governor's race, important in the congressional, it's important in the legislative races. If there was ever an election that is critically important to vote in, it's this race. This election. I mean, I don't want to go into some of my more the issues that I'm concerned with, but there should be something that motivates you strong enough that would convince you that this has got to be a priority.
Yeah. So I think voting in general, you should always strive to do. It's your duty. We live in a great country. We've given such freedoms to everyone, but with freedom comes responsibility. And so it's a responsible thing to do to vote. And educate yourself, again, what's important to you. But what I'd ask you to think about is, when you graduate, are you going to be able to get a job? Ivy League, yeah, you probably can. But are you going to be able to get a good job and have your compatriots be able to have a good job? Are you going to be able to take care of those kitchen table issues? And are we going to be able to keep your generation out of war? Nothing in your life, I mean nothing, is going to compare to if you have to go to war. There is no comparison. And so we need a strong country to prevent that. And under the last administration, we were as close to world peace as we've had in my lifetime. Now, there's 2 shooting wars going on and the imminent 3rd. And so, for me, I would really consider that. Do you want your friends, maybe even yourself, to have to go to war? Who's in a better position to stop that? And then draw your own conclusion. And even though 70% of people your age, if they vote Democrat, 30% ours, I still want you to vote, because it makes you think about and get engaged. And we have a better country the more people who are engaged on either side. The more you're engaged, the better the country is. So I ask you all, please vote. It's November 5th if you're Republican. If it's Democrat, the old joke says it's the next day, but I'm not even gonna say that joke. But yeah, please vote. It's easy to vote. And if you're not gonna be able to make it November 5th, go early and vote early. Absentee. If you're not gonna be able to make it on the 5th, which is what the law kind of says, then vote early.
You literally can go to the Hanover Town Hall, register to vote, get your absentee ballot, cast your vote.
Vote, hand it in. Yep.
And better yet, if you're registering in Hanover on Wednesday, this coming Wednesday, in this very room, you can register.
From 3:30 to 5:30 p.m.
Get out your calendar.
But
Yes.
is there pizza?
No pizza.
No pizza, sorry.
And if you have questions about voting in general, Dartmouth Civics has actually created a pamphlet with kind of everything you need to know, whether you're living in Hanover, living in Summit. You can go to darkgo.org/vote2024. darkgo.org/vote2024 if you have those questions. And our team has been working really hard to put that together. So yes, please join us in thanking our panelists for being here this evening. It has been so awesome to hear from your perspectives and talk about the youth vote. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.